morning. Thank you for
Morning.
agreeing to interview for me with my
happy to be here.
data-driven decision-making course. Appreciate it. So can you tell me your name and what your role is in the district?
Sure. My name is Bridget Gallagher. I'm an instructional specialist for secondary math. And if it's okay with you, I wanted to just talk a little bit about my background.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just kind of give a little bit of cohesion of how I ended up here. So I actually started in the corporate world and went back to school to get my education degree. I taught 1 year of elementary math and science, which was not a planned situation, but that was the job I could get. And then I ended up here in Allen. I taught math for 5 years, all levels, primarily some of the struggling students, some of those strategies. We called it at the time an opportunities class, which is a double block class. And then I transitioned to CTE, so I did that for an additional 5 years. I taught the STEM and BIM course, which is a high school credit course. And then while those last few years, while I was in the classroom, I got my master's degree in instructional leadership. And then I got an instructional coaching position here at Lowry, this building, which you're very familiar with.
Very familiar.
So I was here for about 4 years, working very closely with the math department specifically because that was my background. And then a position opened up that is my current position, the instructional specialist coach. So just really excited to kind of step into this role. I've been doing it for almost a year and a half. It's been great, a lot of fun, a lot of challenges.
Sure.
A lot of interesting conversations with teachers. You get to see a whole different perspective from just being at one campus to being at 6 now. You just see a lot of different things. So it's been great.
So when you say 6 campuses, are you covering all of the grade levels, or do you have a specific set of grade levels that you're responsible?
Yeah, great question. So with secondary, the way that our campuses are aligned, elementary is pre-K through 6. So the elementary instructional specialist handles those grade levels. And I work with teachers from 7th. Our middle schools are 7th and 8th. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where it starts. So 7th all the way through 12th grade, calculus and statistics, the AP courses. So when I say 6 campuses, we have 3 middle schools, and then we have the Lowry Freshman Center, the high school, and we also have a STEAM Center. So my STEAM Center group is super small. It's just a group of 4 teachers, but I do still meet with them and talk through things.
Okay. And the STEAM Center is primarily upperclassmen?
Yes, okay. It's only upperclassmen, and the only math-specific content we have there is statistics.
Okay.
And so the rest are primarily science-driven, STEM-type electives, things like that.
Great. So can you talk briefly about what your role is and what your responsibilities within your role are?
Yes, so that is a very loaded question, and kind of funny story. My boss actually brings this story up fairly often. When I interviewed for this role, I asked what she does on a daily basis, and it was such a hard question, like she couldn't even answer it because overall, one of the things that, speaking of data, it's very important for us to have a pulse on what's happening in the classrooms. So as often as I can, I meet with you and other coaches, and we do classroom visits so that we can develop training. We can develop just conversations, just to get a pulse of what teachers need, which has completely changed. In the last few years, we have teachers that don't know their content, right? And
Absolutely.
So we've never seen that in secondary and elementary. That is sort of a thing because they teach potentially 4 subjects. But in secondary, that's always been a strength for our teachers. So I have specifically this year been working with teachers on content, which is a challenge. So every year it's sort of like a new goal, a new way of analyzing, but it's hard to sum up a position. So I do a lot of PD. I do a lot of coaching. I coach coaches. Let's see. But speaking of data, since this is a heavy data-driven interview, there is a lot of conversations and discussions and decisions made around data because, as you know, fortunately or fortunately, a lot of state testing is important for students, and there are some benefits to holding some accountability pieces, which I do understand, but that is part of our role. When there is some data that doesn't look great, my boss has to go in front of the board and we have to come up with a plan to kind of clean that up. So that is a real thing that we do, we are concerned about. And one of the major struggles we have with data specifically is here on this campus, because we now have, for the first time, all of the advanced students are filtered out of the classes, and the on-level is truly students primarily that have struggled with math most of their career, because, this is really one of the few times where the students come together and there's 4 different levels, right? Which is kind of unique. We have advanced geometry, then we have on-level geometry, then we have advanced algebra. And so the true on-level algebra is students that overall have struggled with math. So it does sometimes look, the scores come back a little bit lower. So we do a lot of unique things here to try to support those students for where their gaps are.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we've done a lot of work with data this year in the Algebra 1 department specifically, trying to adjust instruction based on that information. So tell me, kind of getting into the data side of things, tell me more about what types of data you collect as part of your job, or what types of data you're using as part of your role.
So the types of data that we really look at are, we look at map data. So the middle schools take map data 3 times a year.
Okay.
So we do look at that to make decisions. And then we look at the STAR data, interim data right now, and then the STAR data in May, because that's going to create some of the decisions of what do we do with the students that failed the STAR. Typically there's a summer school option if they don't attend that. Then we're actually working with teachers right now for the first time. We have what's called strategy courses at the middle school. And in the past, I taught strategies here or at Ford. You're just thrown into it. Like there was really no curriculum. There was no guidance. There was no goal setting. Like it's just like, okay, these students failed, do a great job. And so one thing that was important for us is to develop curriculum, pacing calendars. Some of those veteran teachers are going to be retiring soon, so we wanted to filter them into the conversations of what has worked well for them. And we actually recently had a cadre, well, it was more of a professional learning for the first time in December, so that all those teachers could be in the same room and really talk strategies. We did purchase an SEL piece, which honestly landed flat. I don't know that we'll repurchase it again, not because it's not a great program, but a program is only as good as the teacher that's willing to use it.
Absolutely.
Right? So the veteran teachers are using those SEL pieces on a daily basis, but some of the new teachers don't have those tools. So having those conversations around that. But as far as data on a daily basis, one thing that we have implemented recently, because we spend a lot of time looking at data in middle school and Algebra 1 because that's where the standardized tests are. And so even when I started here at Lowry, geometry wasn't looking at their data at all. They weren't even taking the same assessment. So one thing that's challenging, is teams that don't have a standardized test hovering over their head. They don't feel necessarily the importance of or value of data to the level that like the middle schools and Algebra 1. So what was implemented about 2 years ago is what we call skills checks, and this is something that has morphed and changed. But essentially what we want our teachers to do is we want them to be assessing before we get to that big unit test, and then looking at that data, analyzing it, seeing what students are struggling with, remediate, intervene, so that when they get to the unit test, we're not sitting there in a meeting like, oh, we all knew they were going to bomb number 3 because they struggle with this. So what are we doing as a math department, district department, to get students to be successful versus the other way around. And so being proactive versus reactive is something that we really pushed. Now, we don't look at that data because we're not interested in really what the data looks like. We're interested in what are you doing with that data? Like, how are you going to make teaching decisions based on what your students are struggling or excelling on?
Right.
And so that's something that has been a challenge, but now I feel like the ball's rolling. We've gotten a lot of buy-in. I was actually in an advanced pre-cal classroom last semester, and I was asking the students what they thought about skills checks, and the specific student said that she actually really loved it, which I was shocked by. I tried not to get too crazy with my facial, but she said it helped her prepare for the test, so she knew what she struggled with, and she can go home and study or ask the teacher for help, and so that she's not missing it on the test. So I thought that was pretty powerful, that some of these things we're putting into place are actually supporting students, which is really the goal. It's always about the students. Sometimes we feel that gets lost, but that's really why we're here. So.
Yeah, I love that data is coming back up from the students and that they're able to identify when that's helping them out. I'm going to kind of veer off for just a second. So you mentioned cadre, and just for because I'm sure it'll come up again in conversation. So cadre is what we call our curriculum writing teams here in the district. So I think that's important to note, because people are like, when I first came to Allen, I was like, cadre, what's cadre? And then someone was like, curriculum writing. I was like, oh, okay.
Do they just call it curriculum writing? Okay,
yeah.
I've been in Allen a long time.
Yes, yeah, it's just curriculum writing teams. So it looks like you use a lot of quantitative data as well as the qualitative that you're collecting by doing classroom observations and looking at assessments that the teachers are using and things like that. What technology tools does the district provide to allow you to collect all of that data? And within those technology tools, are there any that you've found that maybe the district doesn't provide but that are also helpful?
Yeah, great question. So we have a lot of technology. We're very fortunate in this district. I will say, in the strategies classes that I was talking about prior, we did purchase IXL, which is a software that really differentiates each student. They take an assessment, a diagnostic tool at the beginning, and then based on how well they do, it gives them questions, and then it changes the level. Like if they keep getting those questions correct, then it changes the level of those questions. It also, when the map window closes, I'm able to import all of that data into that software as well. So for those specific classes, we have that piece. As a district, we have Canvas, which we do pull some analytics. It's a little bit clunky with the level that we have of Canvas. And then we also have Aware, which is a great tool. One thing that's a challenge is these are great tools. However, math teachers really love paper and pencil. They really like to see the work, which they struggle with seeing some of that work. Another tool that teachers actually are learning to love is MyOpenMath, because it does do the partial credit piece. We're also super fortunate because we do have a former math coordinator who developed what is called a data dashboard, and it basically pulls all of this information into one platform. So it's very user-friendly. Aware is pretty user-friendly, but this is kind of a different level of being able to look at data. I mean, one of the new features is we can look at the map data and at the same time look at former STAR data. So in the middle school level, we can really see that growth piece, which is hard to track. And see literally this student had masters last year, in the next row it'll say like this student is expected to only meet approaches, so we can hone in, and then you can click and look at those students. You can hone in on those 30 students that aren't expected to hit that growth piece, and so that brings awareness for the teachers to kind of keep an eye on these students to get them to where they need to be.
Absolutely.
So that's pretty phenomenal. I can't say that very many districts have access to that kind of.
This is the first district I've been in that has that level of data available. And is that data available to, I know you said the middle schools can look back, can like Algebra 1 teachers or geometry teachers look back at students' 8th grade or even prior data?
Yes, so the teacher access is kind of trickling. It's a little bit clunky for map data because the way that map data is taken, it doesn't actually, it's not tied to the teacher, if that makes sense. So right now, some of that access is only at like coaches level, administrators level. Teachers are starting to get access. The other negative thing is it's primarily only pulling from Aware at this point. The full circle moment would hopefully for it to be pulling from all the software capability that we have. But this will be shocking that costs money.
Right.
So it's sort of like pick and choose. But teachers, I mean, what's really, I think, awesome about it is the person who's working with the developer, he asked the questions, like he sat down with teachers and interviewed them. Like, this is to help support you. This is not for people to come at you to like what I call data trauma. A lot of us in math or potentially in science or that background, we all have a little bit of data trauma. And so when we talk about data, we have to be very careful with teachers about the purpose of it. And so him interviewing teachers and even students to see, like, eventually, you know, the goal would be students to look at their own data and set their own goals, right? So he got feedback from those teachers about what they would want to see. And so that's how he developed it, based on that and based on, I mean, literally he's talked to so many people in the district. I mean, there's so many niche things that now they have this data at their fingertips where they would spend days, you know, literally like morphing all of this stuff together. And so now it's like all right there. So it's pretty awesome.
And I think one thing I've found that's really special about that too is that I've been in districts where they've had a district data coordinator who compiles data, but they're, for lack of a better way of saying it, they're untouchable. And I love the fact that we can just email our data person and say, like, hey, does it do this? And he'll make videos, he'll send you back an email, or there's even been times that we've asked for specific things and he's like, didn't think about that, and it's added to the dashboard. So it's very flexible. And it's not just we're one and done, it's a continually evolving product.
That's what's really awesome about it. Absolutely.
So what data do you feel that the district isn't collecting but should be collecting?
Wow, that's a loaded question. I don't really think, I think the data that we're collecting is really what we need to be collecting. I would like to see teachers having a lot more buy-in. So speaking of that skills check, the way we kind of look at it is leveled. Like the first level was just to give it, right? Now I think teachers are giving a skills check and now they're looking at the data. And so the next tier that we're really honing in on, and I've met with some team leads at the high school, is okay, so now we're at the level 3 where we're looking at the data, what are we doing with that data, right? And then hopefully with that, then it's reevaluating. So we intervene, did it work, right? So then we're looking at kind of that second data piece. And so I think that's not coming from the district. I mean, best case is for the teacher to really be looking at their own students, right? Like not on a district level. Like we have, really our scores overall are really, really good. And so I think we are keeping a good pulse on that. Our AP scores are also really successful, calculus specifically. Last year she had 80% of her students get a 5.
That is fantastic.
A 5. And so, I mean, we honestly, AP is kind of hands off. Like,
right.
They've
got their
they're
system.
Like rocking and rolling.
Absolutely.
And so yeah, I think if there was anything that we were needing to collect data, we would be doing it, right?
Okay.
So, because that's kind of an important piece.
Yeah. So one of the things is we've talked a little bit about like the skills check, and you just mentioned using that information to drive how teachers make instructional decisions. So what are your expectations, or what are your boss's expectations, because there's a district coordinator above you for math? What are y'all's expectations on how teams across the district use data to drive their instruction?
So truthfully, our expectation, which we have created some data protocols, which that's just a template to support team leads or support teachers. But realistically, what we'd love to see is just kind of what I was saying before is okay, let's talk perfect world. So perfect world would be for a teacher to assess throughout that lesson.
Mhm.
And so they know what that student needs within that lesson. They're doing that tier 1 intervention in real time, which we do have some teachers doing. But if we're talking about like ideal situations, that would be it. But as a team, what we're trying to kind of move towards to get to that level is just the skills checks piece for them to take that data, record that data, look at it as a team, come up with a plan for intervention, ideally a plan for enrichment. That piece gets lost, unfortunately, and then put it into action, right? So we sit in meetings and say we're going to do this, but then are we actually doing it? And so some teachers are, some teachers aren't. So that would be, I guess, the expectation. But I mean, realistically, we wouldn't need skills checks if we were assessing like throughout that lesson every day.
Yeah, you're good, no worries.
Did that answer? I kind of went on a
No, that was
loop-de-loop
perfect.
tangent.
That was absolutely perfect. So you talked about the data protocols, so I just want to follow up. What are those data protocols? Like, is it a form that you use? Is it just a general plan that y'all have? Kind of what is that data protocol?
Yeah,
look
great
like?
question. So we kind of pulled from different sources, got feedback. You were an absolute support with creating this, and then got some feedback from teachers. So the one that we have right now goes through an actual test, and it's TEKs and what are the TEK percentages, right? So we can kind of have an eye on that. And then looking at some of the really successful TEKs on that specific assessment, and then looking at some struggling TEKs on that assessment, and then coming up with a plan. Let me backtrack. When we're looking at the successful TEKs, we really want teachers talking about, so what did that instruction look like? Did you do a specific activity? Did you do a Kagan structure? Like, what do you think you put in place to get those to where they were? Because that's an important piece that we really need to be talking about, is great instruction. And then with the struggling piece, really looking at so what can we do to intervene? And I feel like this piece often gets lost in the PLC meeting because teachers are just like, I don't know. So one thing that we've tried to do is have teachers look at their data before they attend the meeting. That's been helpful. Just that one strategy has been helpful. And then one thing that I've created is, unfortunately, team leads don't get training really at all. Some don't. Some do. Some are able to attend. We have a new leadership cohort that's been super successful for teachers. But aside from that, we don't have a lot of support. So I basically created some basic questions for team leads to ask throughout the PLC. And then underneath that are just some strategies, and also where to get some more strategies, and then just simple things, because sometimes to intervene, you don't need to do some crazy activity. It's just throwing it on the warm-up every day and keeping an eye and seeing how it builds. So just simple things like that. But that way the team lead has some tools real time, so that if we're sitting in a meeting and everyone's like, I don't know, then they can pull from, what about this? What about this? I mean, that's the hope. That, like I said, this is just a template. We just want teachers to be doing those actions, whatever resource they use, it doesn't really matter. So that's kind of our goal, I should say.
So they're able to individualize instruction as long as they're still working towards that final goal.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when it comes to, like, they've used the data protocol, they've shared strategies within the team, how does that information then turn around and impact the curriculum design? So how does cadre use that information, or how do you and the district coordinator use that information to maybe change the curriculum document, add to it, so on?
Yeah, I would say every team kind of has their own way of putting in feedback for their team. We do have what we call a math hub, which is a website that has a plethora of resources that we refer to often.
Love the math hub.
And so on the math hub, we have an option to submit feedback. So when that stuff happens throughout the year, like, oh, maybe we should shift this. You know, we have those conversations a lot in algebra actually recently. I'm going to go on a little tangent.
That's okay.
My first year teaching Algebra 1 was the year that they decided to completely switch up the curriculum and push a very challenging topic to the beginning of the semester, first semester, instead of like leaving it at the end. It caused all sorts of parent phone calls, like emails, because we just recently shifted it back last summer, and all the teachers were like, this is wonderful, this is great. And I'm like, yeah, it is great, because it shouldn't have never been put at the beginning of the semester. But anyway, so decisions like that, it's just because what happens is we'll sit in a meeting in September and be talking about these things about curriculum, and if we don't document that, what happens is the people at Cadre are just winging it, right? So we do value that documentation. And so there's actually a spreadsheet for every single team, and they pull it up and they look at it and they're like, oh yeah, we did think that we want to move this, or we didn't have a resource for this. And they really have time to sit down and analyze, like, if we need to shift anything. That's kind of how we tackle it. It's worked pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the interesting things I've found here in Allen is that Cadre meets multiple times a year instead of just once in the summer. So that curriculum document can be adjusted like closer to the actual moment that the data was collected, so it's still fresh in the brain and people are in that kind of mode of thinking.
So I will say math hasn't done that, except this is the first year we've ever done that since I've maybe 15 plus years. So to your point, I think it was very beneficial. Hopefully we'll keep that in place. We started not with the whole department, we started with just 3 grade levels, just to kind of launch it and see how it goes. We got a lot of great feedback. To your point, it's a lot more powerful to meet more often than just like one and done. It's really hard to make all those decisions like in 2 days in the summer. So
as I say, I was on Cadre for Science, so it's interesting to me that math hasn't done that, because we were very methodical about meeting and making changes. And I don't know if that's because we have the big TEACS change coming up as well, so we've been working towards
that makes sense.
Really overhauling the curriculum completely, to the point where we started with an entirely blank curriculum document a year and a half ago and had built from scratch again. So,
well, I'm sort of newish still to this role, but from what I understand, part of it was teachers didn't want to leave, like, were worried about leaving their classrooms, and so we were very strategic on the days that we chose and the times that we chose. Where the majority of the learning it was more review type situation, because they were worried that would be a day lost for their students, which I appreciate, but also it's very valuable to me as a team, like very valuable. So we were very strategic with putting that in place. I don't know if that's the only obstacle, but the math teachers were not real excited initially.
That's totally fair. I can totally give them
fine.
that. Yeah.
Some are fine, but some are like, oh my gosh, they're gonna miss this content. So we put it really at the end of the semester, so we would hopefully not get that pushback.
Right, that makes sense. It's interesting because you've talked about how, like, depending on changes that have been made, whether it's to the curriculum, like with the parent phone calls back and parent emails back, or then the team, some people pushing back against when Cadre's meeting and whatnot. But I think it's interesting that that's also data that we're collecting, even though it's more informal types of data. So even those, what we consider like maybe minor, decisions are being pushed by some sort of qualitative data.
Right, yeah. That's a good point.
So just continuing on, you've mentioned this briefly, but sometimes we get data back that is concerning. So maybe, test data comes back that isn't as great as we expected it to be, or, students are struggling with something that was unexpected. So how do you, from the district level, address that situation?
So Ninja Mind Tricks works really well. So to your point, recently, working here as an instructional coach and just in general, usually our advanced students are not on our radar, right? We're
Mhm.
usually looking at the students not expected to pass, which a lot of times is very complicated because a lot of times their behavior issues, they're absent, there's loaded stuff with that. But recently, we have a new team here that's teaching advanced algebra, and when we looked at some of their scores, it was a little concerning
Okay.
because those are the students when we look at those scores, it should not mimic what the on-level scores look
Mhm.
like. And so when there's a little bit of reflection or mirror image of on-level and advanced, that kind of came up on our radar. So to answer your question, there's not like a one blanket answer in this specific situation. We met, and you were
Mhm.
a great advocate as well, with the whole team. We've never had 4 teachers teach advanced. One teacher is brand new to the content and just wasn't necessarily on my radar to support him to the level that he probably needed support. So we met and we came up with a game plan so
Mhm.
that we're pushing those students that are advanced to really be to the level that they should be. You know, they are typically students that chose to be in advance, and
Mhm.
so they want to really master the content. So we want to get them to master that content. So we actually met yesterday and talked about what that would look like. Talked about, and it wasn't on some teachers' radar to even think to contact the parents of the
Mhm.
students. We have students that right now in advanced classrooms are projected to fail the STAR test.
Oh my.
So that's a pretty big red flag,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
Because those students should not be on our radar for that situation. So, we met and came up with a game plan as far as warm-ups and what the intervention is going to look like. Because we have time, right? The
Mhm.
interim data, we still have a chunk of time to get those students to where they needed to be. And the veteran teacher did lead. He's always had very exceptional scores. He did go through some strategies that
Mhm.
he's utilized, and so I think it was helpful to hear that. We also have some teachers that are teaching their advanced course at the same time, so they're going to do some tag teaming, some small groups.
Okay.
So to answer your question, in a big sense, there's no like one size fits all situation. It's all just based on where we're at. Pam and I have a really, that's my boss.
Right.
I don't think I said that this time. We have a good pulse right now on the strategies teachers. We're meeting with them coming up because those are the classes where students are projected to fail
Mhm.
the standardized tests. And so it just depends on the situation, I should say.
So how much time do you spend diving into the why behind the data that maybe isn't where we want it to be versus just getting down to creating the action plan?
I think the why is pretty easy usually to decipher.
Mhm.
Fortunately, I've been in this district for a long time, so I know a lot of the teachers pretty well.
Mhm.
And then we are super fortunate to have like your role, the instructional coach's role, because to me that's the biggest piece, because I can depend on you to kind of have a better pulse of what's really happening, because I'm not able to be here all the time.
Right.
And so even just meeting with you and the other coaches, they give me really good insight. They have other conversations that I'm not privy to and things of that sort. So the why is pretty easy to diagnose. The action plan is pretty tough because, as you know, you have some teachers that are delusional. They think the students are the problem, and they just want to complain about the students. This analogy was given to me a long time ago, is like parents are putting their best kids, they're sending their best kids that they know to school every day. So we have to meet them where they're at, and we have to do what we can during the school day and school hours to get them to where they need to be, right? And we just can't spend hours complaining about the students.
Right.
And so that's the biggest obstacle. I don't think the why is hard, it's the action plan.
Okay. So I'm going to go a little bit off script and maybe put you on the spot, so I apologize in advance. But I thought it was interesting yesterday. We had a conversation with a teacher who was a little frustrated because she teaches a strategies class, and she was very frustrated with her data because she looked at it and said, I don't feel like my test data is where it needs to be. And I thought it was interesting how you pivoted and changed what was perceived as negative data into a positive. Could you talk a little more about that conversation and how
Sure.
how the data kind of can show two different things at the same time?
Yeah, absolutely. So, data is really tricky because there's so many different pieces that aren't necessarily displayed, right? So,
Mhm.
kind of what I talked about is that student who may have failed the STAR 3 years in a row. Well, that student may be homeless, may be dealing with all of these pieces. And so, working with Maddie really closely, she has never taught a strategies type class. We're calling that strategies. It's really not. It's their only math class. But one of the things that you have to focus on with that group of students is growth. And if you aren't ignoring the growth and you're just looking at the pass fail situation, then you're going to miss the whole piece. And one thing that we didn't talk about yesterday, but Maddie's classes that first week, she had students that wouldn't even do anything, like do nothing, do zero things. That first test she took, students wouldn't even finish the test, and not because they didn't know some of the content, it's the confidence piece. And so with those students, it is so emotional that you have to have like real strategies, real SEL strategies, so that you're showing them like, yeah, you're still not maybe to grade level, but like if we look at last year and this year, like the gains are huge. And so it's not a black and white situation with those students, and specifically with this teacher. All of her students failed STAR last year, every single one of them. So if you're getting half of them, that's great. If you're getting half of them to not have to repeat an Algebra 1 course next year, like that's a huge gain. And so her data is going to be a little unique and skewed, and just like how she's talking to those students, like it's kind of reflective of maybe she needed to hear all the gains that she's made working with those students. They've made great strides as students, but she's made those gains for them as well. But yeah, that's why data is so complicated. People sometimes don't like to say it is, but it really is, because often we're comparing apples and oranges, and that is really tough to do and to decipher. But yeah, that's we do the same thing with like the strategies teachers at the middle school level is, let's just make some gains, right? Let's just keep growing. Let's not focus on necessarily the same expectations that we may have for other students, because you have tremendous gaps. Like, let's just fill in some of those gaps and continue to fill them in, and eventually you're going to get there. So
yeah. So it sounds like a lot of times with data, you have to find the right balance between diving in deep versus stepping back and looking at it as a whole picture, because you can almost make data say what you need it to say. So you have to be careful not to manipulate the data.
Right. Yeah.
Accidentally
That's an excellent point. Data is valuable, but you have to be real careful with it. Yeah. To your point.
Absolutely. So I know we're getting close to the end and close to time, and I don't want to keep you because we have a meeting next again. That's our life, is one meeting after another, right? So where do you feel like our teachers are lacking when it comes to their own data literacy? And then as a pre-follow-up question, I guess, how is the district, or how are y'all working to combat that data illiteracy?
Yeah, great question. So bigger picture is we're seeing teachers come in that are just super new. We have teachers that aren't certified coming in, and so with the illiteracy of their data, what we're finding is we have veteran teachers, so it's not just new teachers, so that's probably not a fair assessment, but that are going a whole class period without really assessing their students. And so they think they are, right? They're asking a whole group question, and we've had some instructional coaches go into classroom and take data of how many questions they've asked to the class and had one person answer versus how many times they've asked students to talk or show some type of processing skill so that they really understand the assessment. And so to me, that's the biggest piece, is if we can just intervene with the tier 1 piece, like every day, which is perfect world, we would be super successful. We wouldn't need a lot of these intervention pieces that we're having to do, Saturday interventions. We have middle schools, we have here, teachers are coming up on Saturdays to do interventions. So how are we combating that? So training, however, that has been moderately successful, that one and done. That's why the coach's role is so powerful, to kind of follow up on that. But we are moving towards a new plan, which hopefully will be successful. So next year, and we actually have a group of math cohort that we really, it's a leadership group that we kind of tag team and get some really good ideas. So Pam and I will come up with a suggestion, and they'll kind of give feedback. And so right now where we're at is, for that August PD is one of the sessions, and we very much differentiate the sessions that we give to our math teachers. At one of the blocks, it's going to be an option for them to attend a cohort. One of them is probably going to be like the training that I've led that talks about direct instruction being effective. So that would be a cohort. We're probably going to have a cohort for building thinking classrooms. I can't remember the third cohort. And then the fourth is, if you don't want a cohort, if you don't want to commit to 4 days a year, 2 of them being on PD days, meeting and hashing out how is the strategy working for you and so forth, because it's not successful if they don't want to do it, right?
Absolutely.
So we'll have an alternative session for them, which we're trying to thinking through what that would look like. I think we're leaning towards lesson planning, just having that discussion. So it'd just be a session on lesson planning, where these other cohorts would meet 4 times a year and really sit down as a group and talk through how is direct instruction working? What are you doing? What are you implementing? So it's sort of that soft accountability. So it's great that we give training, but if there's not that follow-up piece, then it just kind of falls flat. So we're hopeful with some of these cohorts that we implement, it'll maybe start that ball rolling. So maybe there will be a couple people per campus that'll do, building thinking classroom, or they'll do some of this direct instruction piece, and they'll be implementing it. And then other teachers, maybe they can get them too. And so that's kind of our plan for now. It's really hard to, a great teacher is one that's open-minded, right? So if you're missing that piece, it's really hard to train up some of those not open-minded teachers.
Absolutely.
So that's our current plan. We're always trying to revamp stuff and come up with better ideas and more effective strategies. So that's kind of where we're at.
I appreciate that. So just as kind of like a final thought, do you have a final thought about benefits to using data, challenges, or just using data in general?
I think the benefits are, for me, the biggest benefit is to use the daily data. Because I've never sat in a meeting, to your point, I've been in a million meetings, I've never sat in a meeting where we look at interim data in isolation and the teacher's completely shocked. Oh my gosh, I can't believe that student, it just doesn't happen. Your students, and you know where they are at. And so to me, it's that daily data piece that I want to continue strengthening, because there's just no shock value with the interims and the star data. They're in your classroom, so you know exactly where they're at. So I think sadly sometimes those data pieces are helpful to hold teachers accountable, because one thing that we've noticed, and my boss specifically said this, we don't struggle with 7th, 8th, Algebra 1 TEK leveling overall, because they have the standardized tests hovering over them. Where currently we have a geometry team, we have an Algebra 2 team, that we're having to literally look at their tests now and say, this isn't a TEK, right? Because they haven't done that, unfortunately, in a while.
It's interesting that they haven't.
Because what's happened is we purchase these textbooks, and so they use them very robust, so like a learning management system textbooks, and so they don't really use them as much. So they used them 10 years ago, and then they tweak. So now we have new members that are like, what's this question? This isn't even the level that the TEK is. And so data is, I hate to say, it does hold some accountability when there's a whole team involved. So that is a great benefit, but I mean, the perfect world would be just taking data every day.
I think it's interesting you mentioned that the data is being used to hold teachers accountable, but it's all tied back to the standard, because I've been in situations, and this is data trauma, right, that you mentioned, where they come in, they lay out all the teachers' data, and they use it to determine whether you're a good teacher, bad teacher, not are we teaching at the level that the students need. So it was very teacher focused instead of student focused.
Right.
So I think that's really interesting that we're making sure it stays student focused throughout.
Right. Yeah.
So, well, we're at the end of our time. We've got to run to our next meeting, but I really appreciate your time today, Bridget. Thank you for doing this with me. So,
no problem. Yeah. Well, thank you, Mary.
You are quite welcome.